Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Family Voice Australia. Our webinar today is to look at the Religious Discrimination Bill, and subtitle has the government delivered. I'll introduce the Attorney General more formally shortly, but in the meantime, if I just may, while everybody is still logging on, let you know that I'm Greg Bondar, the National Webinar host and the New South Wales ACT State Director. And I also have my colleague, unfortunately, you'll be able to see him, but I don't have a photo of him. Darryl Budge is our WA State Director, and Darryl's going to help me with the webinar as it proceeds. So please make sure that you get the opportunity to ask questions. Now, the format for today will be, just so you know, the Attorney General will make an opening statement of, up to say 10 minutes or so, and then we're going to go into a Q&A session as we normally do. Now, I already have some questions that I've collated from a number of members, supporters, and commentators who are close to Family Voice. So these questions will be put to the Attorney General. Now, if you have a question, I have been assured by the Attorney General that they will be forwarded to her office and they will be responded to direct if we don't have time today to particularly address your question. But rest assured, they will be answered. Well, if I may, I'm going to introduce the Attorney General in just 1 second, and she is the guest speaker today, and she's the Attorney General as well. And it's so good to have the Attorney General here just before Christmas, because this is our last webinar for the year. We've had 25 this year, and it's been very, very productive from the point of view that we've had Christian leaders, politicians, Christian politicians as well. We've had industry commentators. So it's been a very, very good year in terms of having a broad perspective on the outlook of Family Voice Australia. So, Attorney General, welcome, and I'll introduce you. Now, you may not be able to see this, Attorney General, because I know you've got computer problems at Parliament House or wherever you are, but I just want to quickly here's a screenshot, which you'll be able to see when I send you the video. That's basically an article in a local newspaper. In actual fact, it's a gay newspaper that says, Keneally says religious schools should be able to choose all their staff. And here's another article that appeared that's come to me, and there are certain groups that have this little slogan, and it reads, "Tell Labor to kill the Religious Privilege Bill." Well, this is what's going on at the moment, and I think what we need to do is make sure that we have a sensible debate. Attorney General, just before I introduce you, I'd like to now just go to a section where the Prime Minister has introduced the Religious Discrimination Bill, and I'm going to try and hope my technology works, only for about a minute. Let's have a look.
The bill recognises that religious bodies, religious schools, must be free to uphold the tenets of their faith and the ethos that makes their school a community. It is a recognition of the sacrifices parents make to educate their children in accordance with their values and beliefs and the choices they have made for their children's education. As many schools have said throughout this process, faith is caught, not taught. The bill protects the fundamental right for religious schools to hire religious staff to maintain their religious ethos in accordance with a publicly available policy. This protection will be able to override state or territory laws which seek to interfere with that right. The approach detailed in this bill provides certainty to school communities and to the staff they employ through the development of policies that are transparent to the school community. It's only fair. Nothing in this bill, I stress, Mr. Speaker, nothing in this bill allows for any form of discrimination against a student on the basis of their sexuality or gender identity. You won't find anything of that nature in this bill.
Now, I'm hoping you heard that, Senator. Did you hear that video?
Greg, and I actually was sitting in the House of Representatives gallery when the Prime Minister himself introduced the very, very important religious discrimination legislation. So I do remember those words incredibly well.
And I think he even commended you on the fact that the bill has come before the House. Well, that said, let me just sort of introduce you. And now most people will know, if not everybody, that you are the Attorney General. You have taken over responsibility for introducing and fine-tuning the Religious Discrimination Bill, and it's now being tabled. The Prime Minister introduced it a few weeks ago. It would appear then that the question, has the government delivered? Well, yes, it has, in the terms that it's been tabled. It would seem from feedback that I've seen, Attorney General, that you have had political pressures from various sides of politics, and it seems that the government has decided to present a safer bill that had a better chance of succeeding. I know the last sitting week, as you would recall, of the year, it was plagued by procedural delays, finishing without a vote on the bill, which really means that the bill remains in some sort of limbo in the lower house and may have an uncertain future. I know that there are two parliamentary committees have been tasked with examining the bill over the summer. One of these committees is arranged for a survey, inviting feedback from the public. The other one is the Parliamentary Joint Human Rights Committee, before which I'm actually appearing in Canberra on the 21st of December. Senator, if I may, can you give us an overview of where you see the current bill at from your perspective, please?
Thank you very much for that introduction, Greg. And can I also just say hello to all of your listeners? And Greg, I'm really pleased that you are participating in the parliamentary inquiry on the 21st of December. I think that having Family Voice ensure that the voice of so many is actually heard in this debate is incredibly important. So I really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thank you for recognising that the government is delivering on its commitment to protect people from discrimination on the basis of religion. And that is why the Prime Minister himself, in that final sitting week, stood up in the House of Representatives and formally introduced the legislation. Greg, this is a very sensible bill. It is a bill that should command the support of both major parties. I have always been very, very clear in my approach to this bill. I want to bring all Australians with us, and that is why it is a sensible bill that can be supported by the Labor Party. And I'll be upfront with you and your listeners, I was disappointed that the Labor Party did not provide that support to us in the final week. But that's okay, because as you said, the bill now does go before two committees, and we will have the opportunity to further consider it when the Parliament returns next year. But just in terms of the overview of the bill itself provides sensible protections and, as you and I both know, peace of mind for so many Australians. And that's something that should be important for all of us. It does not matter whether we are people of religion or not. The bill will provide you with a protection against discrimination on the basis of your belief or the fact that you have no belief. Greg, we already have existing federal anti-discrimination legislation, and as your listeners would know, it includes the Age Discrimination Act, the Disability Discrimination Act, the Racial Discrimination Act, and the Sex Discrimination Act. However, as the Ruddick Review itself stated, and I think as so many people already understand in Australia, there is no federal Religious Discrimination Act. And that's why this bill is so important. It will provide those of faith, but as I said, and importantly those who have no faith, with the same type of protections against discrimination as currently provided under legislation on the basis of age, disability, race and the bill itself also importantly fills gaps in New South Wales and South Australia. Now, if you've got anybody listening into the podcast from New South Wales and South Australia, they would understand there are currently no protections for people in those states against religious discrimination. So what does the bill in summary do? It will make it unlawful to discriminate on the basis of religious belief or activity in specified areas of public life. That's important, public life, not private life. And this includes the provision of goods, services and facilities, accommodation, employment, and probably something that we'll talk a little bit more about during the course of today, education. And as you said, Greg, and what the Prime Minister was referring to in that excerpt that you played, like some other discrimination law, and this is very important, Greg, like some other discrimination law, the bill recognises, as does the Sex Discrimination Act, the distinct nature of religious belief or activity. And that's why it includes some exceptions for religious bodies, for example, religious schools, to ensure that they can operate in a way that maintains their religious ethos and character. So in terms of the protections provided under this bill, because it's really important to remember, this is a bill that is all about providing protections to people on the basis of religious discrimination. So it fills that gap by providing protections to people of faith and obviously, as I've already said, those who have no faith from discrimination on the basis of their religion in daily life. So if we were to distill that down to some basic examples, what would it look like? So a Sikh should not be discriminated against because of their faith when trying to rent a property. I think everybody would agree with that. A Jewish school or a Christian or Catholic school will be able to choose to employ Jewish or Catholic or Christian teachers if that is their preference and the publicly stated policy of the school openly states that. Transparency is a good thing. In terms of direct discrimination and indirect discrimination, it works in a very similar way to other discrimination acts. There are obviously certain things that religious bodies, as I've already said, can do in good faith under the bill. But many of these, Greg, as you and I know, they're already recognised under the Sex Discrimination Act, that unique nature of religious bodies. So like some other discrimination laws, the bill also recognises the need for exceptions for religious bodies so that they are able to engage in conduct consistent with their religious belief. Again, some really easy examples for people to understand. A Catholic, Jewish or Islamic school can preference people who share their religious belief over someone who does not. Now, I went to a Catholic school. I went to a school here in Western Australia. Darryl would probably know this school. I own a presentation college. It was run by the presentation nuns. And my parents chose to send me to a Catholic school and my sisters and brother because they wanted us to be taught the doctrines, tenets and beliefs of Catholicism. That was a choice that my parents actively made. And the government supports that choice. So in other words, religious educational institutions should be able to preference people who share their religious beliefs over someone who does not. I think also importantly, Greg, the bill also ensures that people can't be the subject of a claim of discrimination for moderately expressing a statement of belief in good faith. But the bill importantly, and we've been really, really clear on this, draws a clear line against statements, as we should, that threaten, harass, vilify or intimidate anyone. And I mean, you would know this well, given everything that FamilyVoice does and stands for. A key aspect of protecting religious belief and activity is protecting the ability of individuals to explain, discuss and share their beliefs. It's as simple as that, Greg. You and I can have an honest discussion. We may not agree with one another, but we should be able to explain to one another, discuss with one another, and share our beliefs without being told you're going to be subjected to a claim of discrimination. Of course, in our discussions, we have to make those claims in good faith. If we're deliberately being malicious, then obviously that's not a statement of belief made in good faith. But what the bill does, and this is very, very important, is ensure that people are able to express genuine and sincerely held religious views. And importantly, Greg, and I know I go on about this, but it is an important aspect of the bill, non-religious views. Can I also just tackle, Greg, before we go into our Q&A,
Yep.
some of the issues that you did raise, and they are issues that we do need to talk about, because it's what the bill does not do. So often we hear the bill will allow the termination of LGBTIQ teachers. The bill does not do that. The bill does not enable the termination of a teacher on the basis of their sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, marital or relationship status, or pregnancy. You and I know that, Greg. The bill only deals with the attribute of religious belief or activity. I think it's important to also remember that the Religious Discrimination Bill does not affect existing protections and, importantly, exemptions in other anti-discrimination law, bearing in mind that under the Sex Discrimination Act, religious bodies, as you and I know, already have exemptions. And even the Labor Party understand it is important to maintain these exemptions. In terms of does the bill allow the expulsion of LGBTIQ students? Again, no, it does not. The bill does not enable the expulsion of a student on the basis of their sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, marital or relationship status, or pregnancy. And again, Greg, as you and I know, the bill only deals with the attribute of religious belief or activity. So the exceptions for religious bodies, which includes religious schools, only apply in relation to matters covered by the bill. And as I've said, that is religious belief or activity. And again, also importantly, the bill fills that gap that we've talked about. It sits alongside the Sex Discrimination Act, the Racial Discrimination Act, the Disability Discrimination Act, and the Age Discrimination Act. And it does not affect the existing protections or exemptions in other anti-discrimination laws. But I would also say this, Greg, and I have to say in all of the conversations that I've had, I don't think I found anybody who disagrees with me, and the Prime Minister himself has made this position clear. Discrimination against students on the basis of being gay, that's not something that we accept as a government, and I haven't found anybody yet who disagrees with me. But to be clear, this bill doesn't deal with that. This bill is about protecting people against religious discrimination on the basis of their beliefs or non-beliefs. It fills that gap federally and in New South Wales and South Australia, where there are no current protections against religious discrimination. And importantly, and Greg, you did raise this in your opening comments, and I'll finish my introduction here. This is something, Greg, that in 2019, the Prime Minister made a commitment to the Australian people. We took this commitment to deliver protection from religious discrimination to the election. The Australian people, they re-elected the Morrison government, and we continue to be humbled by the trust they placed in us. But that means they supported the policies that we took to the election, and delivering on our commitment to protect people from discrimination on the basis of religion is an incredibly important one.
Wow. Thank you, Senator. They are certainly comments that have clarified some areas, but I wonder if I may come down to the nitty-gritty in terms of the bill and in terms of an overview. Let me give you a practical example that has come back to us from a number of supporters. And again, I was interested in hearing your comments about the gay transgender student. Here is a question for you. How will the bill protect religious schools against a litigation where an LGBTIQA or a transgender student in a Christian, Jewish or Muslim school wants to, for example, wear a dress, use a female bathroom even though he is biologically a male, or be called Steve instead of Eve? These actions or behaviours in a faith school go against the faith of that school. So how does this bill really protect a faith school against ensuring that this sort of behaviour is not tolerated? Because I have to tell you that the feedback I have is that these are going to be real issues that teachers and schools will be facing, Senator.
That's a really, really good question, Greg, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to address it directly. As you and I again both know, the bill does not change the existing status quo for this issue. And this is where I think people get a little confused or sometimes deliberately want to muddy the waters in relation to what this bill does. And I really do need to labour this point. You and I, again, because you and I have discussed this several times, and I really do appreciate your ongoing, involvement and discussion with me.
Thank you.
This only relates to religious belief or activity. And I think a lot of people either misunderstand what the bill is about or are deliberately misconstruing what the bill is about. It does not deal with discrimination on the basis of any other protected attributes. So as you and I know, the bill itself does not affect the ability of religious educational institutions established for religious purposes to discriminate on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity. Now, why? Why? Because those exemptions already exist in the Sex Discrimination Act. Those exemptions are long-standing exemptions supported importantly by both major sides of politics. And I do get disappointed when I see the Labor Party do want to make a really big issue out of this, because there has always been an understanding. There has always been an understanding across politics that the ability of educational institutions established for religious purposes to actually operate in accordance with those purposes is just a fundamental part of being what they are. And I go back to my own education. A Catholic girl, a convent school, her parents making a choice to have her educated according to the doctrines, tenets, and beliefs of Catholicism. So this bill does not have anything to do with that. This is about religion and religious belief. More broadly, though, in terms of the issues that you do raise, as you would be aware, about 2.5 years ago now, the government did refer to the Australian Law Reform Commission for further consideration, and this was consistent with our response to the report of the Religious Freedom Review, an inquiry into those exemptions. In fact, all religious exemptions in all Australian laws. But they are two very separate issues and they should not be confused, and hopefully not deliberately confused. This bill is all about discrimination on the basis of religious belief or activity, When people raise those issues, Greg, they're talking about the wrong act.
Yeah. All
They're
right.
in the realm of the Sex
Yeah.
Discrimination Act.
Thank you for that response. Look, I suspect you'll hear
really-
more on this issue, but yeah. Sorry.
No, I think it's a really important question, because I think when people confuse the issue, they say, oh, well, you shouldn't have the Religious Discrimination Bill because it allows this. The Sex Discrimination Act is the relevant piece of legislation. That's been referred to the Australian Law Reform Commission. We are looking at the Religious Discrimination Act, and that relates to religious belief or activity, and those issues should not be confused.
Yeah, look, I totally understand that, Senator. I don't want to labour the point because we've got so many other questions, but I suspect you will find that the faith schools are going to be faced with a real challenge with some of these so-called, transgender or LGBTIQ students who are welcome in any school, I suspect. It's when their behaviour doesn't reflect the ethos or religion of the school that you're going to have issues, Senator. Yeah.
And again, this is a bill, but that's not just in relation to that particular, you're talking about ethos and behaviour. That can be wide ranging.
Correct.
But I think, as you know, in terms of the Prime Minister's been pretty clear, and I haven't found anyone who disagrees with me, that a child should not be expelled because they're gay. And I think we all agree with that. But a religious school should be able to teach in accordance with doctrines, tenets and beliefs. And a really important part of this legislation, and it's something that I had consulted widely with religious schools, more broadly. I mean, you and I had this conversation. A key part of that exception is the publicly available policy. So you and I both know up front, I'm applying for a position at your school, and you are required to give to me the publicly available policy.
Correct.
And I read that policy, and guess what it says? Greg Bondar, FamilyVoice, we teach in accordance with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You've been upfront with me. I now know what I'm getting into. And if I can't agree with that, then you and I, this is what transparency is all about. And I think that's a really important part, that everybody I spoke to said, wow, that's actually a really, really good thing. Have that publicly available policy, ensure that transparency, so nobody can say going forward, I didn't know that this particular religious school wished to discriminate on the grounds of religious belief or activity in employment. This is how they're going to do it. We're going to give preference to people of faith for certain positions. And it's necessary because of this reason. That's a good thing. That's a good thing, Greg.
Perfect. Thank you, Senator. I've got another couple of other questions we really need to run through. Here's one for you that I really want you to have a think about. Why has the government left out conscience protection provisions in the bill?
Now, that is something that will be looked at via the Senate process. And I have to say, Greg, I hope that you will be providing feedback in relation to that. And I will be very minded to accept that amendment. I hope I don't need to say anything else other than please provide the feedback, Greg.
Okay, well, furthering on that then, I note also, and it's been raised by me, Senator, why has the government opted not to reflect the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights in the bill itself?
Yeah, so I have to say, I actually disagree with that. And Greg, I hope I got the previous question. I hope I understood it. I'm not sure. I thought you were referring to the reasonableness clause. If you're referring to conscientious objection, we can jump back and have a chat about that in amendment. Just in terms of the question you just posed, though, the bill itself has been prepared as it should have been, and certainly the explanatory memorandum itself goes through this in detail, and the Statement of Compatibility with Human Rights. It has been prepared with regard to Australia's obligations under the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. And we actually refer to Articles 18 and 26. They were the two articles that we actually referred to when we were preparing the bill. And in fact, the objects clause for this bill, which is clause 3 for people who might have it in front of them or who are interested, directly based upon Article 18 of the ICCPR. And as you know, what the objects clause is it makes clear the overall context in which the bill is to be considered. So we have deliberately done that in relation to the bill, but more generally, the entire bill is actually an implementation of Article 26 of the ICCPR. And as you and I both know, that says the law should prohibit discrimination on the grounds of religion, amongst other protected attributes. So we're dealing with religion in relation to this. And the Religious Freedom Review itself, it recommended that all Australian governments should have regard to the Syracusa principles when drafting laws that would limit the right to freedom of religion. Now, I had a lot of conversations in my extensive consultations in relation to the Syracusa principles. And for those who don't know, the Syracusa principles are intended to provide guidance on the interpretation of specific limitation clauses in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. So what we've done in the explanatory memorandum, and this was very deliberately done, and if someone's looking at the explanatory memorandum, you can literally just do a Control F Syracusa and it will take you to that particular section. But we deliberately reference the Syracusa principles and we set out how that interpretation of specific limitation is to occur. So in terms of the question you posed, I do disagree with it because the bill itself, and as it should be, any discrimination law should be drafted in this regard, has been prepared with regard to our obligations under the ICCPR, in particular Articles 18 and 26. But as I also said, we deliberately set out in the explanatory memorandum the reference to interpretation on limitation and the Syracusa principles to provide that very, very clear guidance to the courts.
Okay. You alluded to reasonableness. Now, here's a question for you then. In every other act, if a business is discriminatory, all they have to prove is that it was reasonable, but under the Religious Discrimination Bill, a religious person has to prove, 1, that he or she was discriminated against, and 2, it was unreasonable. So why does the Religious Discrimination Bill not include the usual clause that requires a discriminator to prove they have acted reasonably?
And I do apologise, Greg. I jumped the gun. I answered that question previously, so I will do. We'll
just be a bit more specific. That's all. Yeah.
Yeah, understood. So this is an issue that rightly should be considered by the parliamentary committees. I would encourage you to provide that feedback through the committee process, and certainly this would be a change I am more than inclined to accept. So again, this is something that provide that feedback. I've been pretty upfront. This is a change I would be prepared to accept. Can I jump back to conscientious objection?
Yes,
Just remind me of what. Just remind me what your question was.
Well, what it said was, why has the government left conscientious protection provisions out of the RD bill?
Yep. Okay. So provisions relating to conscientious objection, they have been removed, but they were removed on the basis that the issue is already appropriately addressed by relevant professional codes of conduct for health practitioners and relevant state and territory laws. So, for example, the codes of practice for health practitioners that were covered by the exposure draft, that was medical practitioners, nurses, midwives, pharmacists, and psychologists, they already contain provisions setting out how a health practitioner can act on their conscientious objection, or in the case of psychiatrists, that they can comply with their ethical obligations not to discriminate without harming a patient. All laws, just for your listeners' benefit, all laws dealing with termination of pregnancy, as well as all laws in jurisdictions that permit voluntary assisted dying, they also contain provisions to permit conscientious objections by health practitioners. But Greg, this is a really important part of discrimination. That's the concept of indirect discrimination. So a health practitioner who believes they are subject to discriminatory conduct by their employer on the basis of their religious belief or activity. So, for example, in relation to conscientiously objecting to providing a certain treatment consistent with the relevant code of conduct, they will still be able to make a claim of direct or indirect discrimination under this bill. It's a really important part. So we're not saying there is no claim. What we are saying is we're not shortcutting it. You are still able to make a claim, but on the basis that the relevant professional codes of conduct and state and territory laws already provide for it, we believe that the appropriate way is you can make a claim utilising the provisions of the Act.
Okay, then Senator, how does a faith-based hospital, say a Catholic hospital, what does it do when a patient comes and says, I want to undergo a transgender operation? It's totally against the faith of that particular institution. How does that play out in the bill?
So you've got to remember, in relation to hospitals, etc., they have a limited exemption, okay? They have a limited exemption in relation to what they are able to do. And the example that you've given, it's not about an individual practitioner. You've given an example of utilising a hospital itself.
Correct.
That is properly regulated by state and territory laws. So that's where that regulation takes place. Just in relation to religious hospitals, aged care facilities, accommodation providers and disability service providers, the bill, as you know, does provide exceptions for them so that they can maintain their religious ethos, but it is a limited exception in relation to employment decisions only. And that's because of the nature of what they actually provide. So in terms of your example, we deal with the individual, not what you've said, the hospital, because they're in service delivery of basically, in the case that you're talking about, it's health, they get the limited exemption, but the regulation itself happens under state and territory law.
Okay. All right. Look, what I might do now is, Senator, I'd like to sort of hand over to my colleague. Darryl, are you available? Yes. Darryl's our WA State Director, Senator. I'd like him to, from his perspective, because he's been dealing with this bill as well, along with me. Darryl, could you pass over to you, if I may, Senator? Thank you.
Yeah, there's been lots of news reports. Thanks for your time, Michaelia, today. There's lots of news reports about some within the Liberal and Labor Party wanting to amend the Sex Discrimination Act, Section 38(3). Can you rule out the government supporting those changes to remove the ability of Christian schools and religious schools to make decisions about students? Now, one of the important things that some people might not be aware of, that if that amendment is made, then it will mean that religious schools cannot subject a same-sex attracted person or a gender-confused student to any other detriment. In other words, to provide any guidance or counselling to that person or to provide an alternative platform for them that wouldn't impinge on the ethos of the school. So what do you say to people within the Liberal Labor Party that want to see that amended as part of the deal to get the bill through the lower house?
What I say to them, and I will refer back to my opening comments. This bill, Greg, as you and I both know, and sorry, Darryl, in this instance, the bill that we have, or should I say the Prime Minister formally introduced into the Parliament, this is a bill that provides sensible protections and peace of mind for many Australians. That's something that should be important to each and every one of us. This is a bill that, because it provides sensible protections, should be able to be supported by everybody. In terms of the exemptions contained in the Sex Discrimination Act, and we have had the opportunity to have a bit of a talk about them today, they have always been intended to be considered separately. And that's why when I was speaking to Greg earlier on, I really wanted to make that distinction clear. This is a bill that protects against religious discrimination. The Ruddock Review recognised that, you know, with over 14 million Australians identifying as having a faith, and all of the feedback they gave, that they do feel that they are discriminated against because of their religious belief or activity. It is incumbent upon us as a government to provide them with the necessary protections. But in relation to the Sex Discrimination Act and the exemptions there, that is an ALRC referral. The ALRC, or the Australian Law Reform Commission, for those who don't know what ALRC stands for, we wrote to them, as you know, two and a half years ago now. They're doing quite a broad review though, so they're also looking at the other exemptions at a state and federal level. They will report back to the government 12 months after the passage of the bill. You are right, though, the Labor Party have made it clear that they will be canvassing this particular issue in the committee process, and it will influence whether they vote for the bill or not. What the Prime Minister made clear is that the issue of discrimination on the basis of sexuality, so gay students should not be expelled. I think we all agree with that. But in terms of the question that you posed, that is squarely within the ALRC review of the Sex Discrimination Act and the broader review. What I would say is this, though, to you and your listeners. As the Labor Party have made it clear that they will be the ones pursuing this issue, Greg, when you appear on the 21st, it is really important that you put forward Family Voice's views in relation to this matter. The fact that this bill is about discrimination on the basis of religious belief or activity. The appropriate avenue to look at exemptions to the Sex Discrimination Act is through the ALRC inquiry, but also setting out what the consequences are if the Labor Party were to go down this path. It is really important for stakeholders to actively participate in this committee process, because I go back to where I started. I want bipartisan support for this bill. And in fact, I would call on Labor to support the bill in its current form. The reason being, it is a sensible bill. It provides sensible protections. It provides peace of mind for so many Australians. It fills that gap federally in both New South Wales and South Australia as well. And I don't think anyone argues with what this bill actually does. Provides protection to people of faith from discrimination on the basis of their religion in their daily life. No one should be discriminated against because of their religion or lack thereof. So I hope I've given you a very clear indication. This bill should be passed in its current form because it is a fair bill and it is a sensible bill, and it should command bipartisan support.
Senator, very quickly, the Prime Minister, in introducing the bill, said that the bill will override state legislation. As you know, in Victoria, there's a lot of anti-Christian type employment legislation in place. Will that override the Victorian Act?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. And I have to say, in my final weeks of consultation, wow, this was an issue that was brought to my attention, not just by Victorians, but by religious educational institutions across Australia. It is a fundamental principle that religious schools should be able to make employment decisions that preference people on the basis of their religious belief or activity. On behalf of the Prime Minister of Australia, and as the person who has been responsible for drafting this bill, I commit to you, that is what we believe. A religious school can make the best employment choice to maintain the particular religious ethos of that school. And so what we have said is this. The Victorian government, as we know, has its amendments. They are going to limit the existing circumstances where religious bodies and schools can discriminate in employment matters on the basis of doctrines, beliefs or principles of their religion. What they will do is this. A religious body will only be permitted to discriminate against someone in employment on the basis of their religious belief, where it is an inherent requirement of the role that the person be of the same faith as a religious body, and the requirement is proportionate and reasonable. And we say, no, that is wrong. The bill, you are right, it will address those concerns, and it will provide that a religious education institution will not contravene a prescribed state or territory law if the religious body has given preference in good faith to persons who hold or engage in a particular religious belief or activity in employment matters. And in particular, to go directly to your question, will the bill override that particular part of the Victorian legislation? The answer is yes. The Religious Discrimination Consequential Amendments Bill 2021 contains a contingent amendment to insert the Victorian law, the Equal Opportunity Act 2010, into Clause 11, and that will take effect when both the bill commences and the amending Victorian law is enacted by the Victorian Parliament and commences. So we are committed.
Good news.
Thank
you, Senator. Thank you. You've answered my question. That's great news.
Yeah,
Darryl, you've got one quick question before I finalise the... Yep.
Yeah. All right. That kind of leads on to the conversion therapy laws that are being enacted in some states and being promised. Where does those laws land in regards to this bill?
Okay. So the bill itself has very, very limited override provisions. So we override the state and territory legislation that is referred to, as I've just said, in Clause 11. And we override the Tasmanian, Section 17.1 of the Tasmanian Anti-Discrimination Act. That's the only override. In terms of the Victorian conversion therapy laws, our bill does not affect the ability of states and territories to introduce laws covering conversion practice. The bill is not intended to impact state or territory laws relating to the unlawfulness of criminality of acts or practices. So to answer your question, that is actually a different issue. This bill is about, obviously, the federal government providing the protections against religious discrimination. We do, in two cases, you are right, we do override state and territory laws, the ability for religious educational institutions to preference, and Section 17.1 of the Tasmanian Anti-Discrimination Act, because it just is, there's no other applicable provision, as you know, in discrimination law. But after that, the bill does not affect the ability of states and territories to introduce laws covering conversion practices. But to be clear, if something is unlawful, obviously that's not tolerated by the bill.
Thank you. Senator, look, we are coming to a close. Look, we have so many questions. I just want to clarify and confirm that your office will answer every one of those questions that people that have asked me. I will Send them to your
Absolutely.
okay.
Delighted to.
Okay,
Delighted to.
and then you can respond to them personally. Can I just say, Senator, we have run out of time, and I know you've got another pressing engagement. I know it. Yeah, well, you're, what is it? No rest at all for parliamentarians or religious leaders. So, can I just say, on behalf of everybody that's come on board here today, the audience, our governing board, Family Voice Australia, and we've got over 100,000 on our database nationally that write to us or contact us. Can I just say thank you very much for making the time to come on board? Look, there are, gaps in the legislation, and we've spoken about that. I'm hoping to point that out in our appearance before the committee. I think the questionnaires were also answered by a lot of people. So, Senator, thank you very much. It is a bill. Look, we do need a religious discrimination bill, no questions. We've got other bills that are in place for other sort of sectors of society. So thank you very much once again. And I have to tell you that the Family Voice and its members are praying for you and for the government to ensure that the bill does deliver for the Christian community as such. So on behalf of everybody, I'm going to say goodbye and thank you very much once again for joining us, because it is a wonderful opportunity to have you on board. So thank you very much, and I'll stop the webinar here. And thank you, Darryl, for helping out. And goodbye to everybody. And this is our last webinar. It will be available on our YouTube in about a week's time. So please feel free to go back and download it. So thank you, everybody, and God bless.
Thank you. God bless. Bye-bye.
Good afternoon.